EMI, and then finally at Bray. The editing process on this, plus mix, music and mix, because it's Jerry Goldsmith's score, I think probably was maybe in 20 weeks. Now I can post in 12 to 16 weeks. But I think it's partly, the Avid is faster. Don't forget, in those days you're using Hollywood Moviola and Chem, right? Or Steenbeck. I used to like that. I used to like hands-on, and Terry Rawlins would go and have the films brought from the shelf, and you'd run it on the Hollywood Moviola, choose a moment, then cut it in, put it on the Steenbeck, then check it, and then do it again. Now it's like press button, bang, bang.
When I read it, I thought myself, this is going to be one of the scariest things if we can get it right, And I think the way we did get it right is by keeping it slow, funny enough, which is completely different than what they do today. And I think the slowness of it made the moments that you wanted people to be sort of scared. Then we could go as fast as we like, because you sucked people into a corner and then attacked them, so to speak. And I think that's how it worked. I mean, I like to go on the set as much as I can. In the moments I could get away from the cutting room, because I like to be there to hear what he's talking to the actors about, and then I can talk to him myself about what does he want out of this scene, and he would tell me what his plan is and why he's shooting it a certain way. I just couldn't get over the look of it. The sets were fantastic, the lighting was great, and performances. And it was just like, I think I said once before, working with him, I did Legend and Blade Runner with him. And it was like, when you get his rushes, it's like walking through an art gallery. Everything is great, you want to dwell on everything. So it's deciding, what are you going to use out of all this material, because it looks fantastic. You know what you've got to achieve from it. But how you achieve it, after all these years, is very difficult to sort of pin down. I did that because of this or because of that. The face hugger, when it flies out of the egg, well, I have various angles on the stuff coming out, including it. And what you try to do is to get, like trying to get it to unwind, come out like it's unwinding. So you'd use a few frames of this and a couple of frames of that and a few frames of that, so that you had this thing whirl. When you look at the first cut of a film like Alien, you've really got to use your imagination, because there's no sound, for one thing. Lots of those scenes were shot with all these noisy machines or effects working on the stages. So you used to run all these things silent. You sit there and look at him creeping around in the rain room silent, and it's boring. So you've got to imagine what it's going to be like with all these jingling chains and the rain. So it's like all those things, creeping around corridors with nothing happening. But when you got the music effects and everything. So that was one of the things you had to sort of combat.
Okay, put that on the screen for me. Can you get closer?
It was 3 hours and 12 minutes, the first cut of it. And I knew it was going to be great, but I said, oh, no, I just hope that people don't get carried away with pretensions, because I remember Ridley's words, I want this to be unpretentious. So I had no input other than to beg them to say, please cut an hour out, no matter what you think. It has to be close to a 2-hour movie that you think you're losing, because everything's there. You don't have to cut out any big moments. It shouldn't move this slowly. And they said, don't worry, we know we can. Nobody wants to lose an extra screening, and we'll get it down. And the next time I saw it, it was the perfect length. It was a 2-hour movie.
Length was an issue, and we had obviously shot the sequence where Dallas is found in the ship as an egg, still alive, and she tortures him. And I know that I seem to remember we had to take about 11 minutes out the movie. And funny, something that, in fairness, that scene never ever really worked quite as well as it should be, because it just didn't really look realistic enough, him and the egg.
I didn't think they were going to be able to use it because of when I read it in the script, it slowed the pace of the exit, of the end of the picture. The picture had to have that pace, her trying to get the hell out of there, and we're all rooting for her to get out of there, and for her to slow up and have a conversation with Dallas was not appropriate.
The last 17 and a half minutes of the film is Sigourney with no dialogue. And we are ripping around those corridors.
I remember when I first saw Alien, I was sitting in a projection room all by myself, and of course everything was much over length. I remember to this day the one scene where he was looking for his cat, and it was in this dark chamber on the ship, and I remember this chain hanging down, water dripping, and they hadn't cut it, and it went on, and I was absolutely terrified. Yeah, I kept saying, it's just a movie, and it really scared the shit out of me, to be honest. I mean, I was terribly frightened with it. And, which is good, because that helps when I have to sit down and write the music for it. I like to go see a film, any film that I'm doing, I try to see it first as an audience and react as the audience, and try to distance myself from what I eventually have to do.
Jerry Goldsmith's score is one of my favorite scores. Seriously threatening, but beautiful. And, I mean, it has beauty, darkness, and seems to play the DNA of some distant society, which you'd have to call it. You know, that space jockey would be from somewhere, and they would have some kind of order, social order or disorder.
I always think of space as being the great unknown, and not as terrifying, but questioning, and so there's an air of romance about it. And that's why I like doing Star Trek, because it's very romantic, and it paints space that way instead of all the weird things and all that. And I guess I approached Alien that way. There was this air of mystery, but there was sort of a beauty to it and the unknown. And I thought, well, let me play the whole opening very romantically and very lyrically, and then let the shock come as the story evolves. In other words, don't give it away in the main title. So I wrote this very nice main title. There's sort of mystery, but it was lyrical mystery. It didn't go over too well, and really I had major disagreements over that. So then I subsequently wrote a new main title, which was the obvious thing, weird and strange, and which everybody loved, and I didn't love, and it was very interesting. Consequently, I kept getting kudos for years after on the main title I wrote for Alien, which was not exactly my choice, and the original one I wrote took me like a day to write it, and the alternate one took about 5 minutes to write.
Let me just say to start with, I think the man is a genius. I think he's done the greatest scores, who I admire. But I also feel he's very stubborn, like I am myself, I think. And when it came to Alien, I temped the film myself with as much Jerry Goldsmith music as I could, because I knew he was going to do the film.
He's an absolute master of like doing a rough temporary soundtrack, etc. He's just got this great eye and ear, and he says, I know what piece of music will be great in there. And so he always put the most, which is a real problem sometimes, because you have this free range of, you can choose any music you want.
And whenever I do these temps myself, I obviously know by that time who's going to be the composer, and I bend over backwards to find stuff that they've done in various other films to see if I can make it work. Obviously you can't always make it work, so you have to use material from other sources. But I just think it's invaluable. And I must say, at times there's areas you can get to work better than they do later, and that's not degrading anything composers do. But I don't think anybody is closer to the film than the director and the editor will ever be. I mean, we live with this, it's ours. And the thing is, when you're trying to create a temp score, and if you're interested in music, which I love, it's a love of mine, then you know the mood you want to create, you know what you want to try and say musically. And I don't think you should try and influence the composers too much, but if you get a mood correct, that's the mood I feel they should go with. They can change the theme, change the orchestration, but keep in mind the mood that we created.
I remember when the pods opened, from the hypersleep, they did eventually temp track it, and in that particular scene they had temp tracked it with a piece of music I had written for Freud. And everyone thought that, oh, look how wonderful that music works. I said, it stinks. It's all wrong. I mean, it was sort of a little lullaby that I had written for Freud. So I wrote a piece. I wrote a piece for that, and it was very impressionistic and very mysterious, but pretty, but mysterious, and I thought it worked brilliantly.
That thing's gonna eat through the goddamn hall. Come on, what's going on?
The film came out with the Freud music in it. Consequently, I got more letters saying, "Starting to repeat yourself, eh?" They had bought the music from Freud and put it in that spot. So you could see that I was sort of like going at opposite ends of the pole with the filmmakers on the picture.
And I don't think he ever forgave me for using like Howard Hanson for the end of the film, and keeping the music that he wrote for Freud for the film. Though that was Fox's decision. You know, they could have said we're using the music that's written, but I do think that what we did on our temp in those areas was better than what he did. And I'm taking nothing away from the rest of the film because what he did was perfect for it.
Well, you know, this is always a tricky part because, you know, finally, no matter how much of it the composer hums for you or plays on the piano or does anything like that, you know, you don't really hear his score till you're on this, you know, recording stage. Or at least that was the way it used to be. And his score, when it finally was way too lush and way too, more like his Patton score, you know, and which was not really what anybody particularly wanted. We wanted it more haunting and weird and strange, and it wasn't really any of that. So, actually, what happened was we bought a couple of Goldsmith pieces that we had in the temp, and then in the dub, in the mix, you know, we really played down a lot of his stuff and played up some kind of weird sounds that we had and all the rest of that stuff. This is really Ridley. When I say us here, I really mean Ridley. And, you know, and he did an amazing job in the dub. But Mr. Goldsmith was quite unhappy when he saw the movie. And, in fact, went to the studio. He'd done a lot of movies for Fox and, you know, announced that we were going to be a disaster and it was horrible and we'd ruined his score and we'd done all the rest of that stuff.
They released it as an album, and I bought the album. And there were a couple of tracks on the album that weren't in the movie. And they were tracks in which Goldsmith used horns to personify the alien. And it was very effective, this creepy, distant honking that comes in that is clearly meant to be the alien's theme. And it's very effective. It's not in the movie. But then I can't really see any place in the movie that you could use it without it being intrusive.
Ridley is a brilliant filmmaker. He's a brilliant visualist, and I think that was just his second film, and he wasn't as articulate then about what the music should do. I think he thinks so much in visuals, and music cannot replicate the visuals. It's not what it's supposed to do. And I think he was thinking more in terms, at least the message I was getting for him is he wanted me to be visual with the music. Well, I can't be visual with the music. That's not what I'm supposed to do. Let the director and the cinematographer put the visuals on the screen. Let me do the emotional element. And I think that's where it became a big problem with me. And fortunately, I had a lot of time to do it, and I went back and redid music, and somehow it all worked out finally in the end. But there was a problem. And I think the biggest problem was just in communication between me and the director. It would be interesting if that film had been made today and Ridley had now the benefit of having made so many other pictures and worked with a lot of different composers, how he would have approached it, you know, with me musically. The real challenge of composing music for films is to write a score that works brilliantly in the film and also has a life of its own that stands by itself. I think many of the great scores of the past work brilliantly in a film, but taken by themselves, they don't stand alone.